Greetings, friends. My name is Ihor Havrishak. Today, on the calendar, Wednesday, May 28th, I traditionally invite you to look at the most important news from this crazy world, which primarily relate to you and me, Ukrainians, and to our Ukraine. Before we start, I want to ask each of you to like, subscribe, comment, write where you are looking from. Our audience is very huge, the whole world writes. I am very pleased to watch it. Also, don't forget to share our conversation and subscribe to YouTube 24. This is how the YouTube algorithm works. In this case, we are promoting our pro-Ukrainian position. This is very important. And, of course, Ukrainian content to displace everything Russian that is now in this world. Let's start with what? The rift between Washington and Moscow is growing. Trump took a hard look at Putin for the second time. The Kremlin tried to respond, but the Medvedev company was very quickly silenced in the White House. Finally, Volodymyr Zelensky promised Putin mirror answers regarding the latest massive strikes on Ukraine. So, Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, for the second time harshly walked on the dictator of the Kremlin Vladimir Putin. Before that, calling him crazy for attacks on Ukraine. Now the US President has said that if it were not for him, then many bad things have already happened to Russia. He wrote about this on his social network. Let me quote. Vladimir Putin does not understand that if it were not for me, many bad things have already happened to Russia. And I mean the very bad ones. He plays with fire. Later, the State Department clarified Trump's words. They said and hinted that the president could begin to take measures against the Russian Federation. Yesterday, May 27th, State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce told reporters that Kremlin dictator Putin is beginning to feel the wrath of American leader Donald Trump because of what is happening now. As we can see, today, using the example of Putin, there are moments in which Trump perceives things differently. And just like in other cases, everything will develop very quickly under this administration. The Financial Times writes that the latest statements by the American president demonstrate growing frustration with Putin's apparent intransigence in the negotiations. In particular, Moscow does not make concessions and refuses the ceasefire. The State Department spokeswoman was also asked to comment on the Kremlin's reaction to Putin's criticism by the US president, who called him crazy after the aerial terror against Ukraine. Bruce emphasized that Donald Trump is determined to stop the war, which began before he took office. And his comments towards Putin clearly indicate a personal interest in the essence of what is happening. If the Russians cared about the essence of how this happens, that is, the war in Ukraine, they would think less about it, about Trump, meaning his statements, and more about what they can do, what is in their hands, to stop the massacres and murders that are happening now. According to the representative of the US Foreign Ministry, it is quite clear in what position both sides of Russia's war against Ukraine are. Donald Trump's fresh statement about Putin that he is playing with fire, according to Bruce, is a clear statement of his opinion about what is happening. And I think, says Bruce, that Russia should take this very seriously. Over the past few days, Russia has massively attacked Ukrainian regions. To which, let me remind you, on May 25th, Trump already reacted and said that he was considering the possibility of imposing additional sanctions against Russia. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump is considering the possibility of imposing sanctions on Russia this week. But this solution is not guaranteed. And the Wall Street Journal also writes that Trump does not seem to want to impose sanctions in the banking sector. Probably because he wants to cooperate with Russia in this direction in the future, in the economic spheres. But we see how Trump's mood changes, especially when Putin does not meet him. By the way, Russia tried to respond to Donald Trump's statements and Dmitry Medvedev took the floor. In the evening, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council and former president published on his microblog an X response to Donald Trump's harsh words about Putin. He wrote that Trump's words that Putin is playing with fire and that really bad things are happening to Russia. And I only know one really bad thing. World War III. I hope Trump understands this. Well, as always, we see that the top leadership of such a state allows itself and misses this thesis, which absolutely cannot be pronounced by any high-ranking official. By the way, Medvedev was also pointed out to Medvedev by Trump's special agent for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who simply pointed to Dmitry Medvedev's place. So, Kellogg called the comments of the odious deputy chairman of the Security Council Medvedev reckless. He also wrote about this in his social network X. Stoking fear of World War III is an unfortunate, reckless comment by Medvedev that does not meet the requirements of a world power, Kellogg said. The special agent added that Trump and his administration are working to stop this war and stop the killings. Kellogg also stressed that the United States expects to receive from Russia the memorandum it promised, which, by the way, is already being added there in Russia. We will remember this with you later, because Lavrov's deputy minister of legislation of Russia Masha Zakharova spoke about it. If we talk about what Trump has been writing in recent days, it is really unprecedented. He has not yet spoken about Putin in this way, but you and I also need to clearly understand one simple thing. Trump is forced to write this because Putin's strikes on civilian infrastructure, the killing of Ukrainian civilians, these massive missile and drone attacks, they put Trump in a bad light, because Trump always says that Putin wants peace, says that Putin is going to dialogue, but we see, in fact, everything looks different. And that's why Trump, they say, says, Putin, I know you well, we talk like that, and you frame me like that. Is it worth betting a lot on these Trump statements? Of course not, because tomorrow he can pretend to Malak and say something completely different, that he does not like what Volodymyr Zelensky says, and Putin is moving towards peace. Therefore, we will be cautiously optimistic about Trump's words, because we are interested in actions, not what Trump writes on social networks. If we talk about the mentioned memorandum, Ukraine has already provided the United States with a list of conditions for achieving peace and is currently waiting for a corresponding memorandum from Russia. This was stated by the same Trump special agent for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, on Fox News. According to him, as soon as the United States receives such a document from the Russian side, it will be possible to organize a meeting between Ukraine and Russia on peace talks. Kellogg added that such a meeting is likely to take place in Geneva. In general, he said on this broadcast that there was an option and was offered in the Vatican. They were all in favor of meeting with the Pope, but Russia was against it. Now Kellogg is talking about Geneva. And again, whether this meeting will be or not, at the highest level, by the way, Kellogg said about Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. But the very fact that, again, Russia says, we don't want to meet in the Vatican, and the United States follows the lead, they say, well, maybe Geneva. Well, such Russians are requested, and the United States does not act from a point and from a position of strength, but from a position of, well, if you don't want such a candy, let's find such a candy. Of course, this is the Kremlin's fault and the Kremlin is aware of this. Kellogg also said and mentioned the so-called peace plan that he presented, let me remind you, in London on April 23, where Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and Steve Witkoff did not arrive because Ukraine refused to consider these points at all. So, he said that Washington has developed a peace plan on 22 points that neither the Ukrainian nor the Russian side likes. Kellogg therefore called this plan good, because, that is, no one likes it, which means that both sides need to compromise, which means that this is a good plan. But I will just remind you of a few points of those 22 theses that are absolutely not suitable for Ukraine, which we will never accept. Well, first of all, remember that it says the following, that the United States de jure recognizes Crimea as Russian. Of course, who will agree to this? De facto also recognition of the occupation of 4 regions, those that are now below the demarcation line. Instead, Ukraine is not offered any security guarantees. It says the following, that they will be the lion's share of some European forces in the future, but everything is blurred, nothing is written. Well, that is, it is enough for us to know only about these 2 to 3 points to say that this plan is really not suitable for Ukraine. In the end, Volodymyr Zelensky responded to Putin about his missile attacks last night and hinted that the response would be mirrored. President Zelensky is confident that in the future, Ukraine will be able to mirror Russia's attacks. A guarantor said this in yesterday's address, as I have already emphasized. According to him, Ukraine is working to increase its own production of drones and long-range missiles. And in the near future, new agreements are being prepared with Ukraine's partners in Europe to invest in such production. Zelensky noted that we are talking, first of all, about drones and long-range missiles. Of course, we cannot publicly talk about existing plans, Zelensky says, about our capabilities. But the prospect, of course, is to respond to all Russian threats and challenges in a mirror way. They there, in Russia, should feel the clear consequences of what they are doing against Ukraine. And it will be. Moreover, the president outlined that Ukraine should produce attack drones, interceptors, cruise missiles and ballistics, as they are key elements in this war. Well, Volodymyr Zelensky said this yesterday evening, and this morning, May 28, it is known that at least 115 drones attacked, including the capital of Russia, Moscow. There are hits on the critical military infrastructure of the Russian Federation. I would also like to remind you of the words of Putin and Lavrov that they must protect everyone and liberate the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine, which is allegedly under terror and under the Kiev junta. So, there is a fresh survey. More than 80% of Russian-speaking Ukrainians declared a negative attitude towards Russia after Lavrov's words about the need to protect them. The vast majority of Russian-speaking citizens of Ukraine, which is 82%, said that they have a negative attitude towards Lavrov's Russia for their statements. The survey was conducted by the Razumkov Center. According to the survey, only 13% of Russian-speaking Ukrainians continue to have a positive attitude towards Russia. For comparison, sympathy for another state looks different. 79% of the study participants positively assess France, 75% Great Britain, and 72% Poland. Answering the question about the most attractive model of social development, 42% chose the European way. Only 6% consider Russia to be the best model. Of course, in the family not without, as you know, that's why we have democracy, so we are allowed any opinion, but a clear answer is the statement of Lavrov, Putin. However, and by the way, remember, also in March, Surkov told L'Express French that where there is Russian peace, there they will move and advance and defend. You don't need to protect anyone, they hate you here and don't want to see you. Here's the point. Regarding the memorandum. In its memorandum on Kiev, Russia will indicate the conditions, as well as the possible timing of the end of the war. This was stated by Maria Zakharova. She added that Russia will hand over the memorandum to Kiev as soon as it is prepared. Now, she says, the work continues. The memorandum on Ukraine, which is being prepared by the Russian Federation, will contain the principles of settlement, the timing of a possible conclusion of a peace agreement, a potential ceasefire if appropriate agreements are reached. Well, again, Russia is talking about a potential ceasefire. The United States and Ukraine said an unconditional, comprehensive cessation. We are ready. This was once again reminded by our Minister of Legislation Sabiha, who is in Azerbaijan on an official visit. We quote Sabiha. I will talk about Ukraine's position. Our country is ready to cease fire even tomorrow. I repeat, we are ready. The ball is on the Russian side. They have to say yes. Their response, in return, is an increase in missile terror. We offer peace, and they respond with missiles. There is no problem on our side. We are ready for 30, 60, 90 days of truce. It seems to me that a clear position, uncompromising. There is no potential possible ceasefire, as the terrorists say. You know perfectly well that Russia explains the refusal of the ceasefire, because in this case Ukraine will rearm. It will receive European weapons, do Morosha, etc. It seems as if the occupiers will stand and drink the tea of their samovar. Absurd statements. Russia tried to explain Trump's criticism, but he called Putin crazy, and now that he is playing with fire. So, Lavrov commented very funny about the madman and wildly commented on Trump's words. He attributed the harsh criticism of Trump, Putin, to emotions due to, listen, sabotage, his efforts in Europe. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry accused the leadership of European countries of sabotaging the peaceful settlement. This, according to him, explains the harsh rhetoric of US President Donald Trump against the head of the Kremlin. And when he sees that a group of European representatives begins to sabotage these efforts of his, pushing Ukraine to completely reckless actions, including drone attacks on Moscow, of course, he may show certain emotions. Like a person who does not like obstacles on the way to achieving noble goals. You can perfectly see and understand how Lavrov distorts Trump's words. Let's explain this to this horse again. Over the weekend, there were massive, terrible, bloody strikes by the aggressor country of the Russian Federation on Ukraine. Hundreds of drones, dozens of missiles were launched, the murder of Ukrainians, Ukrainian civilians, and our children. What did Trump write about? It's crazy. That is, to stop what Putin is doing is madness, and we need to stop killing civilians. This is not the path to peace. And Lavrov comes out and says that Russia wants peace, and Europe is sabotaging it all. It pushes Ukraine to war, so we are fighting. Lavrov's statement is absolutely wild. You can calmly leave your impressions of the fact that Lavrov is worth in the comments. US Senator Lindsey Graham warned citizens of the Russian Federation about the disastrous consequences of the policy of aggression by dictator Putin, who does not want to end the war in Ukraine. At the same time, he wrote on his social network X, the day before he wrote a column in the Wall Street Journal, where he once again mentioned the sanctions, that he has 82 senators out of 100. This is an unprecedented number who are ready to vote for sanctions against Russia, and that Russia must somehow react, come to its senses and take some steps to stop at least the fire. So he is talking about the Russians. I appreciate all that President Trump has done to end this terrible war, but to end any war, you must have partners who are willing to do so. So far, Putin does not want to. Graham, speaking about Putin, urged not to forget that this is the person who assisted the Assad regime in Syria in dropping barrel bombs from helicopters on innocent civilians and on deliberate targets in hospitals in Syria. Also, barbaric behavior is similarly played out in Ukraine, the Republican senator emphasizes. Graham, in his address to the citizens of the Russian Federation, warned them of the disastrous consequences for the country due to the actions of the Kremlin. In particular, because of the casualties in this war, due to the economic downturn and international isolation. Putin is leading you into the abyss, says Lindsey Graham. And you know, Graham is not wrong here, but Graham is wrong about something else. That the Russians, they say, do not understand what is happening, that they are under pressure from the poor regime, repression. Russians rejoice when Ukraine is shelled, when Mr. Graham is attacked in any Russian, popular, authoritative public, when missiles arrive and our children die. There is so much joy, there is so much inspiration in them to continue killing, so there is no one to turn to. But the fact that Putin is dragging Russia to the bottom is already recognized by all experts, both military and specialists in the economic sphere. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, says Trump sees Putin putting him by the nose. While on a diplomatic trip to Vietnam, he was asked to comment on the latest shelling. And the French leader expressed the opinion that the US president is aware of some aspects of Vladimir Putin's lies about Ukraine. Macron also added that he hopes that Trump's anger against Putin has translated into appropriate actions. Presumably, the French president was referring to the sanctions that the United States, together with the European Union, could impose against the Russian Federation. We see that over the past week, rhetoric and criticism of the Kremlin has increased, meaning from the United States. Again, I want to urge you not to make any hasty final conclusions, saying that that's it, the United States has broken all the pots with the Kremlin. No, it is not. Of course, Trump will continue to write that he does not want to hear what Volodymyr Zelensky says, everything is bad. But at this stage, we see that Trump is rubbing his eyes a little and, perhaps, it will be possible to put pressure on Russia. Not because Trump wants it that way, but because that's the way things are for Trump. I will remind you that in addition to senators, both Democrats and Republicans, he is also pressured in his entourage. We talked about this, that Marco Rubio is actually the second person in the United States, because he holds key positions both as head of the State Department and acting national security advisors to Donald Trump. That is, it has a great important impact. And Wall Street Journal says that Rubio is explaining to Trump that you need to put pressure on Russia, you need to impose sanctions, you need to show dictator dwarf Putin that you are to blame for this war, that you must stop killing. That it is your missiles, your drones that kill and create genocide in Ukraine. On the 26th to 27th, Turkish Minister of Legislative Affairs Hakan Fidan was on a visit to Moscow, met with Putin, talked about Russia's war in Ukraine, about ways of settlement. Although it is Putin, or rather his department, who writes that first of all they talked about bilateral relations between Turkey and Russia. We know perfectly well that this is not the case, but Russia wants to present contacts with Ankara in this light. In addition, Fidan met with the head of the Ministry of Legislative Affairs of the Russian Federation, Lavrov, and they agreed on the following. Fidan proposed Turkey as a platform for future meetings of possible delegations of Ukraine and Russia. To which Lavrov said that they do not mind, they do not want the Vatican, but it is a good idea to go to Istanbul. Why is the Vatican not suitable for them? You know how they explained, said that we are Orthodox, somehow it is not good to be in the Vatican. We talked about it perfectly with you, how absurd it is. Moreover, listen in general to all the curiosity and all the absurdity of raising the Russian Federation. Over the weekend, they shelled Ukraine en masse, and then what do? Russia has requested a meeting of the United Nations due to the actions of low-level European states that are trying to obstruct and stop a peaceful settlement. Think about it. Russia launches hundreds of missiles that destroy Ukraine, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. It's just that the whole of Ukraine is on fire, and the next day they say that we are convening an emergency meeting of the UN, because European states are trying to hinder the efforts of a peaceful settlement. If someone is told this in the future, someone who is completely not from planet Earth, he will say, listen, are you sure about your mind? Do you definitely adequately perceive what is happening in this war? Well, you see, cynicism and statements are absolutely wild. And I would like to talk to you a little and explain about the statements of the new Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Let me remind you that he said that Ukraine received permission from Britain, France, Germany, and the United States to hit the territory of the Russian Federation without restrictions. He said this at the European Forum. A vice-chancellor from another party decided to answer him. They are now in a coalition, but Scholz's party, a representative of this party, and Vice-Chancellor Lars Klingbeil. He says that he opposes a change of course to lift restrictions on the use of weapons for Ukraine. And he says the following. Yesterday, Chancellor Merz announced the abolition of the limitation on the range of arms supplies to Kiev. This was criticized, of course, in Germany on his part. And he says that, as far as I know, there have been no changes in terms of allowing or not allowing the full use of weapons for the full range that our partners give us. Merz later explained. He said that Ukraine's allies decided to lift restrictions on the use of weapons a few months ago. Obviously, Merz is referring to December last year, when Ukraine really used Storm Shadow attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation.